U.S. gears up for its election. Donald Trump has pledged to bring more water to drought-stricken California from Canada. While his promise isn't exactly a plan, he did sort of suggest water from British Columbia could just be diverted through Oregon and into the Golden State.
We have millions of gallons of water pouring down from the north with the snow caps in Canada and all pouring down. And they have essentially a very large faucet.
It's just not that simple, right? To me, it's an uninformed opinion. It's somebody that doesn't fully understand how water works.
The United States just hit a wall no one saw coming. President Trump demanded that Canada open its taps, diverting water from the Columbia River and the Great Lakes to quench California's historic drought. But Canada's Prime Minister, Mark Carney, didn't blink. His blunt reply, "Canada is not for sale," wasn't just a rejection. It was a diplomatic earthquake.
America wants our land, our resources, our water, our country. Never. But these are not idle threats. President Trump is trying to break us so that America can own us. That will never, ever happen.
Overnight, decades of cooperation froze. The Columbia River Treaty, once the quiet backbone of cross-border water management, is now on ice. And America's vulnerability has been exposed to the world. California, the engine of U.S. agriculture and technology, is running dry. Food prices are already climbing. Factories are bracing for shutdowns. Inflation, already punishing families, is about to get worse. This isn't just about drought. It's about power, sovereignty, and survival. So before we dive deeper, hit that like button, subscribe, and keep watching, because what happens next will shock you. California is no stranger to drought, but 2025 has turned a chronic problem into a full-blown national emergency. Reservoirs are shrinking. Farmland is parched, and the state that produces 40% of America's vegetables and nearly 2/3 of its fruits and nuts is suddenly gasping for water. For years, California has been America's breadbasket. But with rivers running dry, the crops that stock U.S. supermarkets are wilting in the fields. Tomatoes, lettuce, almonds, oranges, everything is costing more if it can even be harvested at all. Food inflation, already in double digits, is spiking higher. Families who once worried about gasoline prices are now shocked by the cost of a simple grocery run. And agriculture isn't the only casualty. California's tech and manufacturing backbone is also on the line. Semiconductor plants, the same facilities Washington calls critical to national security, consume 10 million gallons of water every single day. Without it, production slows, jobs vanish, and America's much-hyped plan to reduce dependence on Asia's chip supply chain begins to collapse. The irony is brutal. While Trump claims to be protecting U.S. industry, his water demand has thrown it into chaos. The pressure cooker doesn't stop at California's borders. When the state stumbles, the entire country feels the tremor. Restaurants pay more for ingredients, supermarkets hike prices, trucking firms face surging costs, and small businesses buckle. Water scarcity is no longer just a local issue, it's a national economic shockwave. And into this chaos walked Trump with his gamble, demanding Canada treat the Columbia River and the Great Lakes like backup reservoirs for America. He framed it as common sense, even entitlement. After all, these waterways flow across a shared border. But to Ottawa, it sounded like imperial overreach. Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney responded swiftly, branding the U.S. request as nothing short of an attack on sovereignty. His refusal wasn't couched in diplomatic jargon. It was blunt, sharp, and final. Canada is not for sale. Those words echoed across both nations. Suddenly, water, something Americans had always assumed was infinite, was exposed as a weapon, a bargaining chip, and a reminder of just how fragile prosperity can be. And the timing couldn't have been worse. Inflation was already rattling American households. Gasoline, housing, healthcare, all climbing. Now, water joins the list, dragging groceries and energy prices higher with it. Trump promised relief. Instead, he delivered desperation. His critics pounced, calling him the president who reduced the United States to begging for water from its neighbor. Internationally, the optics were even harsher. Allies whispered about American weakness. Rivals cheered the humiliation. China, already investing billions into global water infrastructure, saw confirmation of its long-term strategy. Europe, facing its own climate-driven shortages, began eyeing Canada as the new freshwater superpower. Washington, once the undisputed leader of the Western Alliance, was suddenly the desperate one at the table. And for Canada, the standoff was transformative. For decades, it played the quiet partner, always in America's shadow. But in a single rejection, Canada flipped the script, exposing U.S. dependence while signaling to the world that control of freshwater may be even more valuable than control of oil. But this was just the opening act. Because as California's taps ran dry and America's credibility faltered, the bigger story was only beginning to unfold. And what happened next would shock everyone. Canada didn't just say no, it turned water into leverage. With 1/5 of the world's freshwater reserves, Canada suddenly stood in the global spotlight, not as America's junior partner, but as a superpower holding the most valuable resource of the 21st century. Think about it, 60% of Canada's electricity comes from hydropower, a renewable force that powers its cities and industries while exporting billions of dollars in surplus energy to the US. Add in the St. Lawrence Seaway, the artery moving grain, steel, and goods to world markets. And you realize water isn't just a natural resource, it's Canada's economic backbone. Wetlands alone add an estimated $225 billion annually in ecosystem services, from flood protection to agriculture support. For decades, America thought oil was the lifeline of power, but oil can be replaced with renewables. Water? No substitute exists. Without it, crops fail, factories stall, and nations collapse. That's why analysts are calling this moment the birth of blue gold, a resource more precious than petroleum. And Carney knows it. He leveraged that power instantly. In private talks with Europe, Canada positioned itself as the stable supplier for agricultural resilience. In quiet deals with China, it explored infrastructure investments linking Canada's rivers to global food security. While Trump was pounding the podium and demanding water, Canada was building alliances that could reshape the global order. For Washington, the humiliation was impossible to hide. The image of the United States begging for access to its neighbors' taps spread like wildfire. Trump's opponents branded him reckless. Governors from drought-stricken states accused the administration of having no strategy beyond empty demands. And America's international critics mocked the spectacle of a superpower reduced to pleading over basic survival. But Canada wasn't invincible. Beneath the show of strength, cracks were visible. Only 1/3 of Canada's water is renewable. The rest is trapped in glaciers or lakes with little replenishment. Pollution is a growing threat, with 40% of Canadians worried about contamination in their local supply. And nearly 3 in 10 citizens are demanding a national water strategy to protect against both climate change and foreign pressure. That's the paradox. Canada holds the world's largest freshwater reserves, yet it faces its own internal battles over sustainability, pollution, and governance. Carney's defiance may have elevated Canada globally, but it also raised domestic questions. Can Canada truly afford to be the world's water bank while its own citizens fear scarcity at home? Meanwhile, the US-Canada border itself is now a flashpoint. 40% of that border is made up of shared waterways, from the Columbia River to the Great Lakes. These aren't just rivers, they're arteries of trade, power, and survival. The Columbia alone provides 40% of US hydropower. The Great Lakes drive 1/3 of Canada's GDP. If these waters turn from shared resources into contested battlegrounds, the ripple effects could shake both nations to their core. And here's the terrifying part. Climate change is accelerating the countdown. Droughts are longer, snowpacks are thinner, and glaciers are retreating. The demand for water is rising faster than the supply. In this environment, every drop becomes a bargaining chip, and every negotiation becomes a test of sovereignty. Trump thought he was demanding a lifeline. Instead, he exposed a vulnerability so deep it could define America's future. Water is no longer just an environmental issue. It's the currency of power, the measure of survival, and the battlefield of tomorrow. But this crisis isn't ending here, because the next stage of the US-Canada standoff will decide not only the price of food and energy, but the very balance of power in the 21st century. So here we are. America's farms are drying, factories are slowing, and grocery bills are climbing. All because Washington assumed water was endless until Canada proved it isn't. Trump's gamble didn't just fail, it exposed a superpower's weakness and elevated its northern neighbor into a global powerhouse of blue gold. The truth is simple. Wars of the past were fought over land and oil, but the wars of the future, they may be fought over water. And with one refusal, Canada just redrew the map of power. The question is, how far will this conflict go? Will shared waterways become weapons? Will alliances fracture as nations scramble for control of rivers and lakes? Or will this shock finally force leaders to treat water not as a resource to exploit, but as the foundation of survival itself? If you found this breakdown eye-opening, hit like, subscribe, and stay tuned.